as we're entering mid-February, and you know what mid-February means?
Oh yeah, it's Feel Good February.
Yes. So after dry January, it's Feel Good February in our books. And so today we're drinking the Swa, which is an adaptogen-rich aperitif, which is co-founded by Katy Perry. And we have the honor of interviewing Scout, who is their CEO.
Yeah, Scout talked about her journey from high school to MIT to McKinsey and to now this SWA. So if you're interested in learning about her life journey as well as the company Dessoir, please tune in.
It's Shirley.
It's Esther.
And this is the Move with Power podcast. So today we have the pleasure of getting to know Scout, the CEO of Dessoir, a D2C functional non-alcoholic aperitif brand co-founded by Katy Perry. And funny story, I had actually discovered Scout on TikTok, coming across a super candid and unfiltered video on imposter syndrome and the journey to self-confidence. And despite the fact that she's an absolute badass, I also learned that she's a McKinsey alum, and it was just alignment that I had to bring her onto the podcast. So today we'll explore Scout's journey from being a rock star athlete in high school to being pre-med at MIT, and then scrapping that to join McKinsey, during which she worked at M13, a consumer venture fund, and helped launch brands. She joined Dessoir initially as GM after founding her own adaptogens enhanced cookie dough brand. And now we'll explore her journey. So welcome to the podcast, Scout.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yay. Okay, so before we start, should we crack open our Dessoirs?
Cheers.
Cheers. Okay, before we jump into the meaty stuff, let's get to know each other a little bit. At McKinsey, we're brought up on the MBTI, so I would love if each of us could go around and share ours and what it means to us.
This feels like home, talking about my MBTI. I make my even though my team members don't do the Myers-Briggs test, I still tell them my MBTI and use it as a framework for them to talk about their working style as well. I'm an ENTJ. I think for me, the ones that have been most interesting are probably the E and the T. I'm definitely a very extroverted problem solver, and I see that show up a lot, but I am like kind of a cat in that I like to be by myself at home at the end of the day. So our team is, we work out of the office a couple of days a week, and then we're work from home a couple of days a week. And so I always really value that like time away to recharge. I bring up the T because I'm definitely a T. However, I'm like years in therapy and self-care and reflection have made me more of an F. So I feel like I'm cusp. I can really tap into both sides of my T and Fness.
I can go next because I feel like we share some similarities. So I'm an ESFJ. Probably my F and J are the most pronounced and most emphasized in my personality. I think I'm overall just a very structured planner, which can be good or bad. And then in terms of my F, it's really interesting because I feel like I'm naturally an F, but then I channel more T just in work and since school and everything like that. And so when people first meet me, they all think that I'm a T. And I think it's that, yeah, I feel like there's like this second, I don't know, self that like comes out when I'm just trying to get stuff done. Where like in reality, I'm just a very fuzzy, like touchy-feely type of like person. So that's me. And Esther, what about you?
I'm kind of like a combination of the both of you. I am an ENFJ. It honestly changes over time. I think I used to be an ENTJ and then moved on to ENFJ. And then I think last year I became like more of an I person. So I was like an INTJ, and now I'm back to ENFJ. So honestly, I think, it's really fluid and it really depends on the type of environment you're in. I think when I was in New York, I'm more of an E because I'm super extroverted. I like to, go out all the time. But now I'm in a different place. I think I'm more introverted or I'm more ambiverted. So I think the environment really changes all the MBTIs. But I think all three of us have something in common. That's the J and the N.
Yeah. Well, I do think you're right. I think it's so environmental driven and even season driven. And I think it's like people are
Yeah.
like, "Oh, summertime, go out, have fun, be super social." And then in the winter, you're like, "It's cold, it's dark. Like I want to be, on my couch watching TV."
For
Yeah,
sure.
totally. Different environments bring out different sides of you and allow you to express different parts of yourself. So that's always really interesting to explore.
Scout, let's start from the very beginning. We know that you have always been a big achiever since high school. Can you just talk to us a bit about where you got that fiery drive?
I always feel like birth order has so much to do with personalities. So I'm a middle child, but I act nothing like a middle child. I have an older brother. So I always say I'm as the oldest daughter. I think there's a personality type there. So like I'm the one who is always texting my siblings saying like, what are we getting, mom or dad for their birthday? I'm the one planning the trip. Like I've already have the week set aside on the calendar that we're all going to be at the beach together this summer. So I definitely am a big believer in that having influence. My parents are chemical engineers by training. They actually met at MIT. I think that, for me growing up, like my older brother's super smart. He never had to try hard in school. I think again, a lot of this is like very gendered, but I came in as sort of this type A younger sister who was getting compared to her older brother. And I'm competitive. And I think that just like fired me up, honestly. And the competitive side of myself, I think has softened over time, but I really see that I get competitive when I know I can win. So it's kind of an interesting, I'm like, I'm nicer to myself when I don't think I can win, and then I just don't go there. But if I think there's a chance, the drive comes out.
That's really interesting. And I feel like that drive to win is something that's actually pretty new to me because actually my boyfriend has like that exact mentality. He's a lawyer by training. He's all about getting that final result. We both did debate in college, but he's all about getting that win, whereas I'm about like, oh, learning and like learning new topics and expanding my horizons. So that's super interesting to me. And it sounds like you've been that kind of competitive person from a young age.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think there's
definitely.
studies on orders of sibling as well. I am the oldest child in my family, and I think I possess exactly what you have as a middle child. So it's super interesting to me. But I think most of the middle child I've met are, a little laid back and mellow. Um,
Hmm.
and then I found that the youngest kid is always like the most free-spirited. They would go into arts and like music. Eventually, you begin to drop that level of perfectionism. And so, can you speak to what your journey has been in your career to unlearn those perfectionist tendencies?
Yeah, I mean, really, it started in college for me. So when it was after my freshman year, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder. And I think a lot of that perfectionism and just, um, yeah, but like needing to be in control manifested in that, for me. And so, I started the recovery process when I was, yeah, summer between freshman and sophomore year. And I think like a lot of that was the softening that I'm talking about of figuring out like, you mentioned this in the beginning, like I was in high school, I was a runner and a rower. In college, I was on the crew team. And I went from big fish, small pond to big pond, small fish in college too. And so I think there was this like re-understanding of, I mean, not to make this like so deep, but like, what is my identity, right? And how do I self-identify if I'm not getting A's, if I'm not, on the top boat at crew or like whatever it may be. And so I think a lot of that process that I went through with my eating disorder actually really helps me let go of these other aspects of my life. And honestly, I still feel like it's this ongoing journey for myself of like, what is my identity? What's core to me? What are the things that matter? And I think when you go through any type of hardship, you get to reconnect. My family and my support system are of the utmost importance. And that's what matters to me above all else. So like if everything else crashed and burned professionally or otherwise, like I would be okay because I have my people. And so I think that's something that that softening and that like perspective shift has been a journey and one that I continue to be on while still super passionate about, super motivated by the things that are happening at work, or if I'm applying myself to something outside of work, and just like trying to be a little bit more like you, Shirley, make it about the journey and the process as opposed to the outcome or the destination. But I do think it's an ongoing evolution that I'm still in.
Yeah, that's definitely a journey that I can relate to as well, in terms of kind of shedding some of that tendency to like always need to be the best and like always need to perform, and to more just like being a human, realizing the value of our close relationships, realizing that that's the what's most important at the end of the day, rather than shaping our identity around what we create, but more just like who we are. What would be your advice, Scout, to those who are, in that boat that you were in early on in your career? I guess at McKinsey, we call it like the insecure overachievers, or whatever you want to call it. What would be your advice to them, and how can they kind of continue to be on this journey as well?
I'd say two things. Find your cheerleaders. I've had amazing mentors, managers, my partner, my family. Find the people who are profuse with their praise, because I do think that like having people around you reinforce things when you're in that moment of imposter syndrome makes a huge difference. And depending on where you are in that journey, you might really need to hear it from other people that aren't as close to you, that you really respect and look up to. So I think that's part one. Part two is, what's been really helpful to me is just exercises around value and fulfillment and personal contentment. And so I think it's, even if it's just taking the time to reflect as a child, as an adult, like what are the moments where I felt the most content and fulfilled? Like, who are the people that I was with? What did that feel like? What did that look like? You start to see and unpack that actually so little of that comes from where you're spending your, whatever, 10 hours a day working, which is okay. Like, I think that's okay for those things to coexist. But I think it helps to find a set of, again, that sense of self that is outside of where you're putting most of your time and energy and passion into.
Pivoting a little bit to your career moves, talk a little bit about how your experience in both consulting and the venture firm shaped that interest and that entrepreneurial spirit that you have today.
I have so much gratitude for my time at McKinsey, because it was, one, a super steep learning curve, but two, an incredibly empowering environment. I think that the rooms and the conversations and the responsibilities that they put into the hands of, I think I was 21 when I started there, is like mind blowing to me, but I am so grateful for it. There, I worked on a number of like consumer type strategy projects and amongst a myriad of other functions and industries. And I just found myself really naturally gravitating towards it. I was actually consumer and entertainment were the two areas I was really excited about. So coming out of McKinsey, I did an externship at M13. And that was really kind of along this vein of a hypothesis that I had for myself, which was that I wanted to start my own business. And while I was there, we partnered with Procter & Gamble, who was looking for, at the time, the whole world of direct-to-consumer and e-commerce businesses was really, I'd say, at its peak. And they wanted a partner who really understood how to launch D2C businesses and scale them effectively. And so my role there, because we were just getting that program off the ground, was a lot of thinking about what are the teams that we're hiring for these businesses, and what are the metrics that we're looking at, and how do we scale something, again, effectively, given the construct of this. And it was while I was there that I learned so much from the people around me in terms of like creative problem solving and not having the same resources that you had at McKinsey to like scrappily get things done, and just that so often you're not reinventing the wheel when it comes to the problems that you're solving. So I kind of fell in love with this like very early stage aspect, and I felt like I was just absorbing different leadership styles, this like expertise around e-commerce businesses, what like venture capital thinks about, looks at, is operating around.
So what was it like to go from advising clients to defining the like operational and talent strategy at M13 to then actually starting your own brand? Because you talk about like literally making the dough in your kitchen. And how is that shift like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's another crazy learning curve. I didn't know what a palette of product was before working on the cookie dough business. And so it was like, I think I had started to build this playbook, I think outside of McKinsey, that was really rooted in building your own network, leveraging that network to help solve different problems that you're facing. So it's like one thing that we ran into really early on was to have functional ingredients in any products, they need to be basically recognized as food by the FDA. And this whole world of ashwagandha and other adaptogens is just it's new and it's really up and coming within this country. And so there were different ingredients that we first wanted to put in the cookie dough that like technically by the FDA you can't even put in the cookie dough. And so it's like, how do you figure that out as an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, like a lot of Googling, a lot of like going and finding other brands that have these types of ingredients in their products and then iterating from there. And so, I would say it was simultaneously like I was so not prepared whatsoever, but also had a lot of the foundation both from McKinsey and like the way that you break down problems, but also from being in the venture world. And you have to be a lot more externally focused in gathering resources to help you solve problems. So whether that's like, again, like we ended up hiring a regulatory agency who had some insight on these ingredients and doing a project with them. But it's like finding that regulatory agency, you have to figure out how to do that. So that's just some examples. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think like anything ever really prepares you for making cookie dough 9 to 5 and then like trying to scale the business on the side. But it was a very, very, very rewarding, and again, like showed me how much this like 0 to 1 stage can be exhilarating.
So at Deswa, you stepped into the role of the CEO after leading the company as GM. Did you feel ready for the role?
What a loaded question. I remember having the conversation with a friend afterwards, and I was like, I feel pretty scared or uncomfortable, but I think where I've felt that way in the past is just realizing it's part of I'm outside of my comfort zone, and that's a good place to be. I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I've got to go read a bunch of like books written by CEOs, and I thought it was going to be as straightforward as that.
What were your biggest shifts in both like your own mindset as well as your day to day from running as GM versus CEO?
I think a lot. I mean, besides like there were certain responsibilities in my role that changed. So as general manager, I wasn't responsible for capitalizing the business, whereas CEO, I was responsible for capitalizing the business. So fundraising became a big part of my job, and managing our investors as well, and managing, basically, reporting to / managing the board relationship. So there was sort of just like the shift in time. And then I think more broadly speaking, a lot of the like onus around thinking about long-term business strategy, right? Like as the CEO, there's a mandate of sorts that, I have from the board of like where we want this business to go. And I'm responsible for operating, executing, and setting that vision and that strategy with them. And so a big shift is like, I had a lot of ownership before and a lot of responsibility as general manager, but really that like mindset around what am I seeing and hearing and believing in terms of information and with the business that's going to like put us on that path. And really for us, we want Deswa to be the number one non-alcoholic ready to drink option. And so what's it take to get there, I think is the question that I'm constantly asking and reanalyzing in a way that I probably was focused more on execution as opposed to strategy in that general manager role. And then there's a whole aspect of team. And so I think like while I had direct reports before, it's like thinking about the shift from, thinking about like, what's the team culture look like? What are the processes and systems that we want to have in place? How do you think about like, are we going to be in the office? Where's our office going to be? Like, are we going to hire remote employees? Right. So just thinking about like, what's that team construction, team culture through line and thread.
Yeah, definitely. Like once you move into the C-suite organization and also, managing teams and expectations will probably be a big part of, your day-to-days. Ever since you've become CEO, what have you learned about leadership style, and any lessons?
I love that question. I think a big lesson for me has been that you are your own unique leader. And so I mentioned like I wanted to read a bunch of books written by CEOs. And I think it's I do think it's really important to like study other leaders. And again, at McKinsey, like you guys have the benefit of working with a bunch of different leaders over a period of time. So you see different styles, you absorb different things, and like you kind of Frankenstein all of these different elements from your role models into what feels, unique and authentic to you. And since I've been in this position, I'm just spending less time. I'm not working for all these other different people, right? Or I'm not spending as much time with like a manager, right? The same way. And so I have to work a little bit harder to, I think, continue that evolution of my own professional development. That might mean like working with an exec coach. That might mean like, I haven't joined programs like it, but there are a lot of like early stage founders, operator execs that are part of like communities where they're, talking and meeting each other. And so I think it's just, it's looked more like being intentional about investing in that, because there isn't somebody corporate like program that's saying, okay, here's what we're going to do to help you become an engagement manager, right? Or here's the program that like all associate partners go through, et cetera.
Yeah, there's definitely no syllabus for being a CEO. And you talked about managing teams. What have you learned about, motivating a team since becoming CEO? Have you encountered any hardship, or how do you overcome these?
Every person is so different. And so that's one big learning I've had is the way that I motivate or inspire or even manage or don't manage one, let's call it direct report or employee versus another, has to look really different. And I think that's something that when I first started into the role and I was trying to apply my same philosophy across the whole team, it was like, well, wait a second, this isn't really working, especially as you move out of a world where you're used to working with a lot of people that are trained to think and operate exactly the same way that you've been trained, and you're a bunch of generalists. Now you're in a world where you've got a bunch of specialists. So I've got my director of sales and my director of brand marketing and my e-commerce team and my ops team. And so it's really understanding that the reason why, for instance, that like the person who runs our whole supply chain is amazing at her job is because like she's super, super analytical. And so like understanding that the way that we both think is actually more similar than, it's like me and my head of sales, it's like he is like the best relationship builder that I've ever met. And so it's like, okay, what is that strength that he has to lean into that actually like I've learned a ton from versus, somebody else who has the more similar professional upbringing, if you will, that's going to think and operate more like I do. And so I think it's just that uniqueness of approach or kind of tailored approach that I need to like write it down. Like I kind of have my notes for like each different person where I'm like, okay, here are their strengths. Here are the like, things I've done with them or like opportunity areas that I've identified. And I have my notes and I really like think about that before I'm approaching different situations with them, because I also know them really well now too, that we've been in the trenches together. And so just kind of being intentional about the way that I, again, like try to motivate or inspire.
Yeah, definitely need to get to know the person that you're working with in order to maximize and also to improve the company that way.
I think what's so great about working on an early stage business, and everybody at Dessois owns a piece of the business. And so like we all have that skin in the game and deep attachment to it. Like it's all of our babies. I mean, we haven't even talked about like Katie and Morgan yet, but it's like it's Katie and Morgan's baby as much as it feels like it's my baby, as it feels like it's Holly and Ryan's baby. And I think that that's why people love this early stage stuff, as like, masochistic as it may be at times. Like it's really, really rewarding to take something that, you start from zero and to be like, oh my God, we started in 0 wholesale doors and we just launched in Target and that's been on our vision board for 2 years, And so I think it's also just kind of like identifying the right talent to bring into the business who, if we don't have like, a ton of cash to give people, but we have that equity to give people, that like they're going to be really excited by that prospect.
Definitely. Congrats on all the progress that you guys have made. Sounds like amazing story.
You talk about, on the one hand, managing a team and building a very successful team of specialists, but then you also have the board to answer to. Like, how do you divide your time, your energy between those? And do you kind of shift into a different mode when you're working on the day-to-day with the team versus that kind of long-term strategic planning?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm that structured about it necessarily. I find I do my best thinking actually when I'm outside of the day-to-day, and that can even like, it can be like conversations like these, or I was sitting down and chatting with we did a partnership with Goop Kitchen in January, and I was sitting down and talking with their head of digital marketing, and I'm like, I walked away from that conversation feeling so creatively inspired about like, what does it look like to build Dessois brand? And so I think a lot of like I probably spend, I'd say like half my time internally facing with the team and half my time externally facing, which could include our board or our investors, or, just like I said, having those conversations with other folks in the space. And so when I'm internally facing, and, a good example of structure I do have is when I'm in the office Tuesday, Thursdays, I really try hard not to have other external facing meetings. And so I really try to figure out like where I can add the most value, get like, for instance, there's always a million and two things like on the marketing side that we have to do. And so if I can be helpful by just being like, hey, here, we're going to have a whiteboarding session on a Thursday afternoon and talk about, like, this sounds crazy, you guys, but I just did talk to the team, it's February, about what we're going to do for holiday.
Wow.
And so it's like, you have to be thinking like that far ahead sometimes. I mean, realistically, like we'll have our holiday plans locked in by the end of summer. So, anyways, to come back to like, just wrap that up cleanly, like, I think it's about being flexible and making sure that when I am doing something with the team, I'm focused on adding value. And then when I'm doing things external, there may not be that immediate like payoff, but I think that it's all like kind of like putting your like good, juju out into the air, like it all kind of comes back in some fashion.
What areas would you say in your day-to-day or like content-wise do you feel the most stretched? Because one person can't be good at everything, right? How do you know how to be helpful, or how do you kind of support the team in areas where maybe you're not less experienced at?
Yeah, I mean, a great example of that is brand marketing. I have a new director of brand marketing. She joined the team at the end of last year. She's phenomenal. Before she joined, I think I was like filling that gap and feeling pretty inadequate to do that job. And so like for our meetings, for instance, I'm always just trying to connect like what she's doing back to the bigger picture. So if it's just like framing up a decision that she's trying to make, or if she's, or, good examples, like if she's looking for a new agency, I can tap my network to be like, hey, we need a new creative agency, like who has a great recommendation, or we're looking for a freelance graphic designer. And so I try to just, from a resourcing perspective, and like things that I might have access to that she doesn't have access to, or just that bigger picture, like, okay, sure, we have a plan now for March and for April from a marketing perspective, but okay, how are we thinking about this summer? We have a rosé. Like, what's going to be the big rosé moment that you're thinking about? We also do, like, one thing I found really helpful. I feel like we started doing this. This is probably a year and a half ago. Objectives and key results. We do that every quarter. And that's been phenomenal just for me to, like, now the team is really practiced at setting objectives, prioritizing and deprioritizing things, because like you can do way more than you ever have time for. And then saying, well, what does success look like for each of these objectives? And so like now that that's a practice that we have, we do that on a way more kind of informal, regular basis where it's like, okay, if somebody, you know, has like time opening up or some capacity, I'm like, well, what's going to be most important and what are your goals and why do we want to get that done?
Speaking about more of your personal strengths as well, what would you say is a personal superpower that shows up for you as you're navigating these situations, leading people at work, etc.?
My growth mindedness. And, you know, that's a theme that has come up through our conversation, but I think my ability to be self-aware, to reflect and to grow means that I'm not only doing that as an individual, but I'm doing it with my team. I'm doing it with the business too.
That's really interesting. I'm so glad you said that because that feels like a very personal strength, but it sounds like it also is such a superpower applied to whole teams as well.
Yeah, because think about it, like if that's a value of mine, then that means on the team, like there should be more room to, what's the saying, shoot for the stars and land on the moon, right? Like there's room to fail because there's room to learn and grow from that failure. And I think that has also cultivated, and I was just chatting about this with somebody recently, but like this has cultivated more of a conversation around feedback too, which I feel like we're really lucky that was taught to us, but a lot of people like don't learn how to receive feedback and they don't learn how to give feedback. And I just have that dialogue with everybody at Dessois as well. So yeah, it's something I feel like has just elevated my experience. And then I don't know, I feel like everything you're doing every day at work is like always about the people that you're with. And so it's also elevated those relationships.
And how do you take care of yourself in all of this, in both mental and physical health, while operating a team and in this kind of high-paced early stage company?
Yeah, so I'm huge on sleep, which is a little bit coincidental too, because being in the non-alc world, you learn a lot about how alcohol is bad for your sleep.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I just know myself, I'm best when I'm getting 8 hours of sleep. And that means like, honestly, the first thing to go outside of if I have like a long work day or need to get stuff done, I won't work out. I won't do something social. Like I'll say no to a lot, but I won't give up sleep, which is something that I think I had to learn the hard way during some of my projects at McKinsey. But yeah, I would say like making sure I get enough sleep. And then I am definitely, is another like basic, but like I really think that like movement, it grounds me and makes me a less anxious person. And so even if it's like sneaking in, taking a call while I'm like walking, I really try to get like something in every day. And that I think just, again, I've been through periods of time where like I'm not being active and I'm not moving, and it affects my mental health more than anything.
And what does like work-life balance mean to you, and how do you maintain that as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think this has gotten harder the more that I've liked my job, because again, not to sound like a crazy person, but like I love my job. I love work. I love what I do. And I think that means that like, okay, like I'm perfectly happy. Like if I'm working on a Sunday or working late on a Friday night, like that doesn't bother me. And so it's like kind of comes back to this like self-awareness. I look at my calendar for the week coming up, and if I have next week I have a Monday night work dinner and a Thursday night work dinner, and Wednesday is the night that I take my tennis lesson. And I'm like, oh, okay, like I probably need to make sure that like Saturday on the weekend, I'm not doing anything. Like I have no plans, no social plans, no work plans. Like that's my day. And it's just been kind of trying to get ahead of it as opposed to trying to catch up on feelings of, burnout.
That's really interesting and smart that you've gone into a system where okay, because I have this coming up, I need to prepare for it in this way. And that might not look like for you, like, oh, I never work on the weekends or something like that. It's more flexible, it's more fluid, and you're more so kind of integrating your entire life, both work and life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's too, I mean, this is just as somebody who, I mean, I don't have kids, so I have a ton of respect. I mean, again, Katie and Morgan are badass, like working moms.
Yeah.
But I have a really open dialogue too with my partner at home when it comes to like just like basic things, like, okay, like getting groceries and like taking out the trash in the dishwasher. And it's just being able to like navigate what are these really busy periods of time and try not to be, oh gosh, it's like our sixth night of like ordering Chipotle for dinner.
Before we kind of do our usual wrap up, we have a few quick kind of business insight, tactical things that we wanted to get your perspective on. The first is building and scaling a business, right? For a smaller startup, what are the top 3 things that are important to get right for a nascent brand?
I would say for something that is consumer focused, I'll focus on the world that I know.
Mm-hmm.
I would say like your positioning in the space, but being able to be iterative and adaptive, because I'm sure you would talk to like anybody and they've like pivoted in some form or fashion, either like what they're called or what the exact flavor is or who they're speaking to. But I do think it's important to get that right. That's going to be product market fit. I think the other thing I would say is on the same vein of just like starting to build out that community or that network of people that you can tap into for insight. And so like if you're going to start a beverage brand, who are the other people that you know in beverage? And there are a lot of people looking for communities like that and communities that exist. And so it's really not that hard to get started. Like I get LinkedIn messages, right, from people just saying like, hey, I want to start a beverage company. Can we chat? I answer those. So I think just like being comfortable, like getting out there. And then the third thing I would say is just like, you're going to have to be a salesperson. So if you aren't already a good salesperson, start practicing, get that pitch down. It doesn't matter if you never raise money, like you're going to be selling to any person that you talk to the concept, the idea, business.
Earlier, you talked about building a team and finding people who are willing to be invested in the company. Are there any other characteristics you look for, or personalities you look for when hiring, team and members at early stage venture?
I think people that are really hungry and care, like the growth mindedness kind of ties into that, but it's like somebody who, if you hire them in at the director level, like they're, say they come in as director of finance, they really want to be a CFO one day, right? And so that you get to be a part of that journey with them. I would also say people that have like a team player mentality, because the reality is when we're at this stage of the business, like, and we're 8 full-time people. So like sometimes we're like all to get there packing influencer boxes,
Yeah.
And so somebody who's like willing to set aside their own workload to be able to roll up their sleeves and help the rest of the team.
So what's next for the SWA, and what are some exciting things that we should be looking forward to?
More expansion, more shelves. I mean, I think for a while now, we've had people that are drinking DeSoir that want to be able to find it in a store near them. So we're really, really focused on just making DeSoir more available across the country. And then we have a new flavor launching in May, which I can't say anything about, but it's going to be really, really good. So keep your eye out for that.
That's super exciting. I'm ready. So to wrap up, what is next for you? We talked about what's next for Dessoir, but what does your kind of personal roadmap look like in the next few years?
So I would say the most rewarding thing, and I swear this is not a cop-out answer, but the most rewarding thing about working on Dessoir is the fact that I'm really not thinking that far ahead. Like for me, it's been the first time, honestly, since I started my career where I feel like I have my blinders on and I'm really focused on the growth that I'm finding in this role and that the business is finding. So anything for me right now professionally has been like continuing to grow Dessoir and be a part of, again, Shirley, I'm going to go back to like how you were talking about your life, but like be a part of that journey with it too. I love my life in LA. And so just like more sun, more shelves and more Dessoir.
I love that. And we asked 2 questions to all of our guests here on the podcast. The first is, who is a power player to you? Can be either personal or aspirational.
Sellers, who is one of my investors in Dessoir, and she's just like the complete package when it comes to creative, entrepreneurial, like hustler. And so she's somebody I really think about who just like inspires me to move with power, which I know is a big theme for you guys on the podcast.
Yeah, our last question is exactly that. So what does move with power mean to you, and how do you interpret that?
So when I first was thinking about this, like I one of my favorite workouts to do is boxing. And the reason I love boxing so much is like, one, they've got amazing music that's playing. Like I go to a studio that I swear is like the soul cycle of boxing, and you box to the beat, but like you walk out of there and you feel so strong. You feel so empowered. And when I think about move with power, it's like I can literally feel that feeling coming out of the boxing class where like I feel like my best self. I feel exhilarated. I feel strong. I feel like really, really energized to like tackle whatever it is. And so yeah, moving with power is really like embodied in that post boxing class workout, which if you guys haven't gone to a boxing class, I feel like you have to experience it.
Thank you so much, Scout, for this wonderful set of insights. We have so much to learn from you, and we're so excited for our listeners to tune in.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was so fun to chat.
Thank you for tuning in another episode of the Move with Power podcast.
Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, check out our Patreon, and join our growing base of Power Move members via our website in the description box. Until next time, remember to move with power.